Welcome to the series. In these span of videos, we are going to talk about how to be attractive based on the transcendental, I don't always know how to say that. But basically, there is an ancient concept in philosophy. It's kind of a trinity of concepts that are kind of fundamental to just like being itself, and that is beauty, truth, and goodness. And I think that these are a good metaphor or way of thinking about how to be attractive, how to be the ideal woman from a man's point of view, but also from a healthy, high quality man's point of view. Obviously, the loser is going to get in there and be like, oh yeah, here's what I want, and you're like, yeah, that's bad. But basically, this is a series I announced a little while ago, and I'm beginning the videos here, and we're going to talk about, like I said, how to be attractive. There's a lot of weird advice out there, and I think you really have to filter through a lot of bad to find some good. So I have collected here what I feel is the best advice as far as, being attractive and how to attract men if you want to actually get married. There's a lot of, if you want like a one-night stand, it's very easy to attract men, just wear something skimpy and go to a club, But I'm going to bet that those of you watching this want something a little more substantial, and you don't just want to attract a man, you want him to stick around, and you want to attract a quality guy. And that's what we're going to talk about in this series here. There are 3 books that I primarily drew on, technically 4. They are Fascinating Womanhood. This is actually technically 2 books. These came from a series of pamphlets called, I think it was like Secrets of Fascinating Womanhood. Basically, in the 30s, a bunch of psychologists got together and wrote a bunch of pamphlets on how to be attractive to men. And I was able to find these pamphlets. This was like 10 years ago. I don't know where the link to it is, but I found it online and I printed them out. So I have copies of the pamphlets. And then Helen Andelin read the pamphlets and basically kind of, I want to say like edited and updated them a little bit in the 60s, and she wrote a book. Now 80% of what's in here is in here. So that's the first source. And then second, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. This is another really good book. And then this book, which I loaned to a friend, and she took the liberty of covering it because she is afraid of profanity. But the name of this book is Why Men Love Bitches. Pardon the language. It's basically a book on, how to not be a doormat in relationships. So these 3 books, 4 books actually, if you include the pamphlets, these 3 books and these pamphlets are where I'm drawing the bulk of my information for this series. They're all really excellent books, and I think they all have an important angle to relationships. But I think it's important that we look at, just as a tripod, like a stool with 3 legs or a tripod is, one of the most sturdy, structures. You can sit on it, it can balance a camera, it's very stable, especially on like uneven terrain. So I think relationships should approach things from a 3-pronged angle. It's important to be beautiful. We have the beauty, truth, and goodness. It's important to be beautiful. It's important to be good, but it's also important to be truthful. There's a certain honesty and reality that has to be kept in mind in relationships. And I feel like, each one of these books and the pamphlets kind of approaches one or more of those 3 things. So that is what we are going to talk about. Now, let's start with some definitions. Beauty, truth, and goodness. Those are concepts that used to be very well known to the ancients and people in like higher education. That was like the good life. Beauty, truth, and goodness were considered fundamental aspects of reality. And they are also considered, we saw in, from theologians and philosophers like St. Thomas Aquinas, obviously the channel is named after him. They were very big on how God, beauty, truth, and goodness is a reflection of God and the human heart. Because of that fact, because we're made for God, and because God is truth and God is goodness and God is beauty, in a certain sense, God is all those things. Our hearts are made for those things because they're aspects of God. We were made for God. St. Augustine says, our hearts are ever restless until they rest in thee, O Lord. And this kind of indicates that. And so, just as the human heart is oriented toward beauty, truth, and goodness, as a woman, if you can embody these characteristics, I would argue that the male heart is going to be very oriented toward you. So that's what we're going to discuss. And one thing, that we tend to do nowadays is we tend to split these characteristics, kind of think of beauty as, maybe just luxury, truth maybe as like law or a legal system, and then goodness, kind of philanthropy, being nice to people. These are three things that are actually, and once we get into the definitions, and also especially in this video series, it's going to get more clear, there is substantial overlap, and there are certain things as we go through this series, you're going to be like, oh, that's a beauty characteristic? I would consider that truth, or that's actually goodness, because these things, they do overlap a lot. So we will go with the first definition. St. Thomas doesn't talk a lot about beauty. He gives a few sentences here and there, but like everything, his discussion of it is very clear. And he says, beauty is that which pleases upon being seen. There's some criteria, it has to have a certain proportion and symmetry. It has to be whole and complete. If you're missing an eye, that's not gonna look beautiful in the classic sense of the term. And then there has to be a certain splendor and radiance to it. For goodness is that which all things desire. The essence of goodness consists in this, that it is in some way desirable. So goodness has to do with, it is something that answers the inclination, it has an appeal to a certain way we are. And so lots of things can be good. When you're hungry, food is good. When you're curious, knowledge is good. Good is a somewhat subjective thing, but it is something that is desirable. You want it for some reason. And then the last one is truth, which comes from, this is not, unlike the other two, this is not from St. Thomas Aquinas, but this is actually a Latin philosophical maxim. And maybe it's not a maxim, it's the definition, but it is, and bear with me, I'm gonna quote some Latin at you. It is adequatio rei et intellectus. And what that means is when the mind has the same form as reality. So when what is in here corresponds to what is out here, and there's a match, then truth has occurred. It's when your idea of reality matches the reality. And so naturally, truth is desirable. When you are doubting or concerned and you really need to know the truth of a matter, truth becomes a good. It's something good, it kind of solves a problem. And then sometimes truth can be very beautiful, the truth of a situation. If a man loves you and he tells you he loves it, and it's the truth, then there's something beautiful about that, So as you can see, there's a lot of overlap between these three concepts. They often will just kind of blend and weave one into another. It's kind of just the nature of how it is. But, I made the best attempt I could to kind of split the whole area of attracting men kind of into these three categories. So that is what we are going to talk about today. And yes, so stay tuned.